Skype, right? Not through Twitch. I should be muting Twitch. I'm trying to understand your like.
Yeah, I mute Twitch.
Okay. So that's actually.
Otherwise, we'll get the echo.
Okay.
Hey, there we are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today's a little bit special day. We've got some guests joining us. We've got some friends that we're going to be talking to today, and we're getting outside of just writing code. We want to do some things that make it a little bit more interesting to help you grow your tech career. Our friends from the Microsoft Alumni Association are here to chat with us, including Dee Dee Walsh. Let me bring up the where'd it go? Bring up the chat room here. Take a look and see what's going on over there. There's the chat room up there. How's it going there? I see there's Dee Dee Walsh. Nitro Evil is here. Hop in the cloud. Hello to you. Eagle Hansen. Welcome in. Good to see you. Some Microsoft MVPs, some influencers, some other friends from Twitch. Welcome in. So good to see our friends joining us. Let me bring on Dee Dee here, and let's talk about the Microsoft Alumni Association for a second, and talk a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. Let me bring on where's Dee Dee? She's over here in the interview room. It's on the other side of the transition here. Where is it? It's somewhere out on this nice. There she. Hey, Dee Dee. Good to see you.
I have to unmute, right? I want to talk the whole time muted.
There you go. Right. It's old school walkie-talkie style.
Right?
Over. So,
hey, thanks for hosting us today.
Oh, so great to be back and hanging with friends from the Microsoft Alumni Association. This is I love hanging out and talking with you and some of our friends we're going to meet in just a minute, because as the young folks that connect into my stream, they want to learn about how to grow their career, and there's other folks from the Microsoft Alumni Association that want to figure out next steps.
Yep, and that's what we wanted to talk about. Hello and welcome to all of the Microsoft alumni crew. Today, Jeff and I are hosting our second Microsoft Alumni Association Tech Talk, and we wanted to talk about the technical growth path. I hear from a lot of technical folks who want to grow in their careers but aren't sure how to go about it. And so today, what we wanted to talk, we brought on two experts who have been on the technical track for many years, and I worked with them at Microsoft. And these are two super smart guys who are both chief product officers at their respective companies, and both were pretty much superstars at Microsoft. Herman is at a fintech startup called Bluevine, and Trevin Chow is at a visual learning platform startup called Sketchy. And so we wanted to talk about that chief product officer role because we think that that's just that's a really compelling growth path for any technical role. It gives you both the opportunity to continue to grow your technical skills at the same time having tremendous strategic impact on the company. And so that's what we wanted to talk about today.
All right, let's bring on Trevin and Herman. There they are. Hello, friends. There they are.
Hey,
how's it going? So, chief product officer, and as the next step in a technical journey, and both of you have stepped into this role. It sounds, anytime I hear a CXO type role, right? It feels so managerial. How do you get into that chief product officer role from a technical background, from an engineering background? Trevin, do you want to start?
yeah, I mean, I have a technical background. I, had a CS degree in college, but I started my whole career at Microsoft, was in product, and program management, and I grew into this role. And I think that the easiest thing was just a natural progression for me in that timeline of going from product to product at Microsoft into growing my kind of appetite for the kinds of work that I wanted to do to grow beyond the individual feature or individual product portfolio to something much larger. So for me personally, it was just a natural progression and a kind of a cumulative kind of set of steps.
Very cool. And, Herman, how about you? How was
Yeah,
that
so for me,
transition for you?
Yeah, so I had a computer engineering degree from Waterloo. So I think we're coincidentally both Canadians here. Not that we monopolize Microsoft or anything like that, but I did start off in engineering. I was in DirectX. I was in Active Directory. Through my time at Microsoft, it was all engineering and engineering leadership roles that I was in. But what actually ended up happening for me was I just got a little more excited about what we were building and why we were building something as opposed to the how, which was really what I was focused on at my time at Microsoft. So, like Trevin said, it was a progression, right? So, as I continued to do more development, as I started to engage more at a leadership level in engineering, you're naturally just pulled into a lot of these conversations. So it became natural for me to just spend more time in that area. And when I moved from the Pacific Northwest and I left Microsoft and I went into the Bay Area, I focused exclusively on product management. And as Trevin says, it's been a growth from that point on into the role that I'm currently in.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, now I'm feeling it. All right, so it's a progression, and Dee Dee, you do a bit of product management, marketing management for Mobilize. Uh, This is definitely a role that folks can grow into.
It really is, and I think what's interesting is a lot of technical people, especially like if you look at Herman and Trevin, who are sort of off the charts talented guys. They were always the guys who, when you had conversations, they were always the people that we talked about as being ultra talented. But when you have folks like that, and there are a lot of people out there who have that great combination of technical skills plus communication skills, and those two combine. And a lot of times, the technical folks like Herman and Trevin, and we had several on our team back in the day when we were in Microsoft Store, who have that kind of hankering to do more than be in the code. Like they loved coding, but they wanted to be more, continue to grow in that area. And so I think that's such a great growth path for these guys. In fact, I would love to hear a little bit more about Trevin and Herman, kind of what you know more going into what you did at Microsoft and how you kind of progress. Like, what were the stepping stones to moving to more of a chief product officer role, and just kind of how you may not have planned it, but sort of what your progression was that got you here.
Yeah, so I can start, Herman. So I think for me, because starting in the product program management side, I think there's a natural kind of advantage for sticking less in the how you build. And so I think mine and Herman's career started in a different place, even though we ended up kind of at the same place. And I think that is hugely illustrative. I think to there's lots of different paths to get to like the same destination, and I don't know if necessarily chief product officer is the only role to think about, like, oh, that's the only role that can impact strategy. I think that a lot of different roles in companies, startups and big companies alike, I can do that. I think for my own path, I started in program management, like Microsoft calls it. I think a lot of companies blend that with the product management title. But my career started, I was an intern back in 2001. And then over the course of time, I started my career in Windows Live. It was known as .NET back then. And I was in Passport, AKA Windows Live ID, AKA Microsoft Account, like 17 different names of that thing. And then I met Dee Dee and Herman when I joined Windows Marketplace. And the kind of before I did that, like I was involved with Passport and Xbox and Hotmail and a lot of other things like that. But then I think the pivotal time for me is I switched to Windows Marketplace because that was with a smaller group that was scrappier, and then was kind of created the foundation of that Windows Marketplace, which eventually became Microsoft Store, which then that I spent a huge portion of my career on that at Microsoft, and then moved into derivations of that, like the brick and mortar store, sometime there, as well as the Windows 10 App Store, Xbox Game Store type projects before I ultimately decided to explore opportunities beyond Microsoft.
Now,
So
Let me follow up on that because Trevin, there's something that you tapped into there that I hear from a number of folks at Microsoft. And when we think of Microsoft, we think $1 trillion company, biggest software company in the world, 900-pound gorilla, all these terms. But something you said there that I think rings true for a lot of folks is that scrappy small team. Right?
Yeah.
Microsoft is a giant company of small 5 to 10 person teams that just get a lot of stuff done. Do you still see that work outside of Microsoft, having a small group that's able to just like a SWAT team move in on things?
Yeah, I think it's more pronounced actually outside because I think that you hear a lot of people say, "Hey, I'm in a startup-like environment at a big company," and I think there's a lot of things that can be true about that, like culturally, of are we scrappy? Are we aligned? Do we move fast? Do we have processes that enable that? And and is the work more speculative, say, than some of the other larger teams, like say Office or Windows or some of the behemoths? But I think that it's definitely true that the people on those smaller, scrappier teams, like the startup like teams, are not wondering, will they make payroll? So I think there's a big difference in like that, which and you have to prioritize how you think about it and what you're trying to learn at any given time if you're trying to find that type of experience.
Very cool. All right.
I'm hearing on the chat. Oh, never mind. It's saying that we lost audio.
Yeah, I went to when I zoomed in on that last scene, it cut audio briefly. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to make sure it was
Yeah,
back.
just to build on that as well, what Trevin said, I 100% echo this. Like, I think when you're at a little, like when you're in a smaller team within Microsoft, the only worry you really have is, can we grow to $100 million business so that this matters to a blip of the P&L for what is Microsoft, right? When you work for a startup, you don't know whether or not you're going to make payroll, and that is the biggest difference. Like, you are unified together to deliver on something because you have to, right? Like, people ask me what's the difference between Microsoft and say where I'm at right now at Bluevine, or even other companies that I went to after I left Microsoft. And if you use a football metaphor or analogy, like Microsoft's job, my job was really to go take the football to the goal line. It was never really to go punch it in. Like, it was somebody else's job to go punch in anything into the end zone. It was a really hard problem because, frankly, like, it wasn't my pay grade to go make those hard decisions. When you're at a startup, it's your decision, right? And I remember this, like, when I left Microsoft, and I joined Hearsay, like, our president and COO, he was a really senior guy. He was a VP at Google. He left and he joined as a CEO of Hearsay, and he started Google Docs, right? So, like, he's super senior. Sits there, we're in a meeting, and he actually looks to me and he goes, "Herman, do we want to make this investment in this, like, it was this vertical channel that we wanted to do. I'd done all the analysis. I'm like, we should go do it." And he just basically goes to me, he's like, "Do you want to go make this 500K investment?" And I kind of froze there for a second because I'm like, crap, like, I don't think I've done this before, right? Like, everywhere else at Microsoft, it was my VP that had to go make a decision or whatnot, and then I'd just provide the data and a recommendation. And here at a startup, it's my job. Like, if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And so that's a difference. And so there's this like really exhilarating feeling when you're in there because you realize quickly that your contribution is completely scaled differently than when you're at a bigger company like a Microsoft. And not to say, like, not to bash Microsoft. Like, I mean, I thank it for everything that it's given me, the experiences, the people I've met, everything there, right? But at the end of the day, it is quite a different experience.
I think there's a question in the chat about what does make payroll mean. I think what we mean is, like, will people get paid? Like, will you actually get a paycheck? I think for all y'all that were are at Microsoft now or at a big company, say Amazon, Google, whatever, your teams are not wondering, will I get paid like this week, this month? And I think that's not to say like every startup is like in dire straits where we're like, we don't know we're going to make money necessarily, but there is an issue where you think about, especially at a like Sketchy, the startup that I'm at right now, what is our balance in our bank account? Like, what is our burn rate? And we have to think about that. I would challenge, say, any of you that were at Microsoft, and goes for me as well, and I know Herman, it's like we never wondered, hey, I wonder what the checking account balance of Microsoft is right now. And will Aetna or Regions Blue Cross, whatever, pay my how will I get medical coverage? And I think that urgency and that like scarcity of success, I think, is what ultimately is the unifier for startups, and why sometimes startups can be glorified, which I think I don't think startups are for everyone. And I think it's really easy to glorify like, oh, everyone needs to do a start. I actually don't think that's true. I think there can be a lot of fulfilling careers that do a lot of things at a big company. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. But that's why I want to add some color to the comment or the question about making payroll, because it can be a little confusing.
But
Yeah, and sometimes sorry, and let me add to that. And sometimes just a real practical example, right? Like COVID. When COVID hit last year, and small businesses starting shutting down and everything, Bluevine, who's a fintech, there was a real credible question there in terms of what is going to happen. Like, yeah, we were well funded. We have 250 million, over 250 that we funded, but it's a very different value proposition that we're looking at there than, say, a Microsoft, right? When you hit COVID, it's really then not hiring as many people or whatnot. When you're at a startup, you're like, okay, what does this mean to the P&L, the bottom line? Like, we got to figure something out. And it's on you to go do it. So, like Trevin said, I mean, there's so many highs and lows of startups, and we're not even like founders of these companies, right? Even more so and pronounced for founders. But where we are right there, it's just there's an exhilaration of the highs and lows, and like Trevin said, it's not for everybody, but it's also a great learning experience where you could take a lot of the frameworks that you've learned at Microsoft and apply them. The good parts that you like about it, you could apply it to a startup and really make some scalable change.
Now, there's another question that's come up here in chat that I want to make sure that we bring up, and this is a pretty good comment from Wilbo, right? Wilbo is the name here. Let me bring this up. There it is. I work at a company that was a startup, and now we have over 100 employees, and it feels disorganized. What does that transition look like as you start going from, right? We mentioned that 5-10 person team, that scrappy group that gets started, but as you start bringing in more folks, and like Herman was saying about being concerned about the checking account, and do we have the assets to be able to manage these folks and make payroll? What's it feel like so that you can stay organized without introducing lots of layers of management and disorganization that happens there? How do you handle that interaction and growth?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. Like the topic of process, I think, is like really like rich. You can talk about that for hours and hours and hours. I think when I think about a big company and you join a big company, you enter into a set of process and norms that company and those teams do, and the friction and social inertia to change those processes is immense. So for example, if you were going to go into a startup and said like, hey, or like a large company and said, hey, I don't think that we should use this bug system. Like, imagine how difficult that would be to change that for thousands of people, or maybe the entire company. At a startup, you can make changes like that. And I think the process is, when you're at a small company in particular, you need to have the right amount of process and be intentional about it. And I think process is sometimes used as a 4-letter word because we're all victims and have been experienced to really bad process in our lives, whether it's our personal life or our professional life, especially at big companies. And I think that big companies are ripe for inefficiency and stuff like that. But that's the name of the game. In order to scale to be, say, a Fortune 50 company, you have these processes. But I think what gets dangerous is when people leave large companies and bring those exact same processes to small companies, and they aren't right sized. So I think being intentional with process is really critical on how to design that for your team and your startup. And I think that the other kind of the meat of the question there is, I think when you go from small to bigger, I think that question was they were at 50 or 100 people. I think that's a substantial leap to say go from 5 people in a garage, right, to say 50. You start to have a lot of consideration there. But I think that the biggest advice I would give is to identify what is actually the problem you're trying to solve, and then create process to actually solve those problems. And as companies get larger and larger, you need to start thinking a little bit further down the road to anticipate problems and be less reactive and more proactive. And that's been my experience in, how to scale from small to larger and be successful in that. And the goal is really to not have process that feels suffocating. You want process that feels enabling and actually can enable you to do the work that can make the startup successful, than you feeling like I'm doing process because someone told me to, but there's no value.
And I like the term right size that you use there. And I feel like in talking to some startups here in the Philadelphia area where I am, we have folks that have almost Microsoft envy. Oh, there's a Microsoft office here. Maybe some of the folks who were consultants for Microsoft can help us and bring some of what they've learned and done to us, and it's not right sized. Dee Dee, do you see anything like this in your interactions where, gosh, folks, you used to work for Microsoft. Can you bring some of that shine to us?
Oh yeah, and when I first started with our little company, we actually, am I muted? I'm
Nope,
not muted out.
you're in.
Okay.
You're good.
Sorry, I'm having network issues over here. But when I first started at our little company, we merged with another company, and they were small and kind of had the Microsoft envy, and there was a lot of, well, we've seen this is how Microsoft does it, and a lot of people want to copy how especially back then, I want to copy how Microsoft does things. And it's funny because those of us who are either at Microsoft or former Microsoft, there's certain things about the process that we never wanted to duplicate. That, not that we didn't love it, but there's some things where it's like, yeah, maybe not that one. So yeah, you definitely don't want to copy a big company when you're at a small company. I think Trevin said it right. You really do have to right size it, because what you don't take into account is that a big company, when they have a process, they've got a whole infrastructure behind that process that you don't have, and so you have to take that into account. The other thing I wanted to talk to about that I haven't heard yet, that I think is super critical, and kind of why I wanted to have this conversation with you guys, is hiring, and hiring the right people. That's the other thing that I think that without the right people, you are no startup goes anywhere. And so I kind of wanted to have that at some point too. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to talk about that now, Dee Dee, or what do you want to do?
Are you okay with that, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts there. I think that especially in the roles you're in, I'm gotta believe that your recruiting and your talent issue, that's the critical issue for your companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'll go first. What I'd say is like people obviously anywhere are the most important asset, right? It's the people that actually make the company, the products, everything else that happens there. So it goes without saying that that's obvious. I think where startups are more challenging in terms of hiring is, one, you just got to look for the person that has the right DNA, right? The people that are scrappy, that want to get things done, but at the same time are also just really experienced and have the intelligence that you're looking for as well, right? We just realistically, we just don't have the same brand cachet as, say, a Google or a Microsoft or a Facebook, and we can't pay them the same way either. So compensation is always a challenge too. But when you find the right people, and the people in there where you attract, folks that are really smart, either early on in their career or those that are more experienced, but they're in there because they're hungry. They want to do something different. They want to build something completely different. That's when that's super important. And when you find those right people, they're huge multipliers, right? And so for me, it's always just spending the time, and a huge portion of my time is recruiting for the right people on our teams, whether it be on my team directly or indirectly through the engineering or even the operational roles and go to market roles that we have at the company.
Yeah, I think from my side, I think I go a lot. I share a lot of what Herman had just said. I think it is about. I think what you look at for a small startup is very different than what you look at for a large company. A large company, you tend to look for a more specialized set of skill set and focus. Like, oh, we're going to do. We have product X and there's this capability Y. Let's find the best possible product and engineering person that can focus exactly on that, and you're concerned more about specialization a lot of the time. I think at a startup, especially when you're smaller scale, you want to find people that have a wider breadth of skill that could go one way or the other in a variety of areas. So I think it's a lot about kind of that cliche term, intellectual horsepower. Like, can someone get up to speed really quickly, and do they have building blocks in the general area of technology or business that we're actually focused on? I think the most important skill that I look for in hiring and when I interview candidates is about grit. It's about, like, do they have the grit to endure hardship, in a startup, because things aren't always rosy and the path is really difficult at times. So do they have the grit to go through the hard stuff, whether it's hard product learning, hard business learning, or hard team learning? Because ultimately, startups are a pressure cooker and they amplify everything. They amplify business losses, they amplify team member incompatibility. So I think that the other attribute that I tend to look for is, are they a nice person? Like, are they actually someone that you would want to work with day in and day out? And it doesn't mean that they have to be exactly like me, but it's more that just I think we all know what that means. Like, is that person a great team member, and would I want to welcome them into the quote unquote work family? Because especially startups, sometimes you pivot into a completely different business, and so ultimately what matters at the end of the day is the team, and can you push through hard things together.
I
Yeah, I'm
really
so glad. Sorry, I was going to say I was
oh
just going to add to that. I'm really glad you said that, because the two things that I look for are, I always say grit as well. Like, it's just the reality is startups are hard, right? You will pivot. It's also like when you're working with founders, they are very opinionated, and if you feel strong about something and you get shot down, you got to go back to the table and just argue your case, right? Like, it happens, and so you need somebody who has a lot of grit, who won't take no for an answer, will just push ahead. So you need those characteristics. The other one that I always look for is like just intuition. Like, given call it like 50% or 40% or 30, 20% of the data, are they right most of the time? Like, anybody can make a decision if I had 80, 90% of the data. Like, the data tells me the story. I don't need it. But it's like, do the people who need to move fast, who have a limited amount of data and time to go make this happen, because you're a startup, will they make the right decision the majority of the time? And so that's the other thing that I really try to probe for, in terms of characteristics.
it, I I hear that it right. It's the crucible of being in a startup, and the forcing function of, you know what, I need to trust that these people have my back. It's almost military in nature, that it's live or die in the startup, because you got to make sure that at the end of the day you built something that's turning into a product that folks are going to pay for, that's going to get you paid at the end of the week. And it's so important, and it forces you to have that very business focused mentality around everything that you're building and working on. I want to go to a question here from chat about some of that forcing function, and this is an interesting perspective. Eagle asks, how much of your motivation or drive is related to having medical insurance through work? That feels like a very American and a very American-based concern that folks in Europe and other parts of the world that have national health care don't
Right.
run into.
Yeah, I would say that I think for if you have dependents, you have family, you care more. And I think for someone in countries where they have more, broader access to more universal healthcare, free healthcare provided by the government, I would argue that those people also care about healthcare. They just
Oh, yeah.
care less about where it comes from. And so I think, everyone cares about healthcare. And I think that if you just have less dependents, you care a little bit less. But I think for me, like I know Herman has a family. He has a partner and two children. I have a partner and two children as well. And so I definitely care. I want to make sure there is that safety net for them. But I think the good news is I have never heard of a startup that doesn't offer healthcare. Like they all offer healthcare. I think the question is
Table stake
how
for any
It's probably
company.
by law too, right?
right,
So
right. So
yeah,
the issue is really comes down to how good is that healthcare. And I think some startups are much better than others, and it's natural that when you get larger, uh, they get better healthcare and they kind of think about it a little bit more. And I think it also depends on the savviness of the founders, right? And how much they want to care earlier on. And I think that you just have to take your own point of view there and say, like, what do I care about? Do I have specific special needs of coverage? And then if that is a non-negotiable, then look for that. I don't think that you should feel guilty at all about caring about certain types of benefits, whether it's healthcare or something else that needs to support you and your family.
yeah. But generally, I'd say, if someone is really cared about, like if they really care about healthcare, then typically there is a correlation to better healthcare as you get bigger, right? And the startup environment may not be the best environment for that person, realistically. And so just perhaps stating the obvious there.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And speaking of maturing and growing with your company, there's a question here from, I think this is pronounced Ali Spain has a question here, and this is a little bit more focused on growing out of Microsoft. And the question is, what advice would you give to your younger Microsoft self? Some of us were much younger at Microsoft than others.
By the way, Ali runs the Microsoft Alumni Association. Hi, Ali.
Hey, there we go. So, do you have any advice that you would give to your younger Microsoft self?
I,
I think it's really popular for a lot of Microsoft alumni to say, I wish I left earlier. I should have like done it. Like, I'll tell you my experience. My experience was I really enjoyed my time at Microsoft. Obviously, not every single moment because that's unrealistic. But by and large, like I had a lot of great experience at Microsoft that I feel like enabled me and armed me for my post Microsoft life. So in terms of regret, I try not to have a lot of regret about the decisions I made in my career. And I could have optimized like XYZ thing. But in general, what I think that I would give advice to myself if I had a time machine, I would say, hey, like just keep your eye on the bigger picture. Like you may not be here forever. So it's not about the needing to leave at a certain time, but it's about using the time that you're there with a bigger picture in mind. So for example, like if you're trying to learn about a certain set of skills, constantly re-look at your situation and say like, is this the environment that I'm able to get the best
Jeff, we can hear
set
you typing.
Sorry about that.
is this the right environment to teach me those skills? And if it's not, take a look at it and see like where is another part of the company where you could get that skill. And I think that is one of the advantages I would say of working at a big company. Like where Herman just mentioned, like healthcare is almost always going to be better at a Microsoft of the world. But I think what's also better is that the latter ability to laterally move is way more flexible. You essentially keep the same pay and same compensation. Your job is just changing. At a startup, you don't just move to another startup easily. Like that's a complete job change with a lot of considerations in it. So that would be the advice that I would give to my younger self.
Yeah, I think for me, it'd be, just thinking about it, I think there is, it's more around risk taking. I think at my time at Microsoft, I was probably just less risk taking. I was more worried about what happens if I change jobs? Would I piss off my VP? And so therefore, then am I kind of doomed, right? And it's harder for me to go move. I was really concerned about that, and I think that what I tell myself is just stop it. Like you're just being stupid, right? Outside of Microsoft, the world is huge. Like when you're in there, it feels like that is the only place you can be, and it feels, at least for me, it felt like uh, um, there was just a lot of risk in terms of making tough decisions. And the reality is when you leave and you look back, I wish I did take more risk during my time at Microsoft. Again, everything that I learned there was great. Like Trevin said, I genuinely enjoyed my whole experience at Microsoft through the different roles, the people that I've met that I still keep in contact today. So there's really like that would be my one aha or nugget that I would say, just do more of that.
All right. Hey, Dee, what would you tell your younger self at Microsoft?
You know, I'm kind of the old time Microsofty where my biggest competitor was another group at Microsoft. Um, so
No.
I know, right? I was a Visual Basic product manager, and my biggest competitor was Access and Visual C++, and I think that was true of so many of the groups I was in. I wish I had looked at my at other teams as coworkers instead of competitors a little bit more. I mean, I don't think I made enemies for life, but I feel like I could have maybe a few better relationships if I hadn't had that old time Microsoft um, uh, thinking of everybody's the competitor. And I don't know if that's true anymore. I'm guessing that there's
It,
a kinder, gentler Microsoft, but
there's an interesting related topic there, which is like I think when like one risk of being in a large company, a technology company like Microsoft, is that you very rarely, if you're there, you use competing technologies to build your product. So there's a risk that when you leave, your whole world is only the Microsoft ecosystem and platform. And like you just said, there's an entire world out there. And I think one of the biggest whiplashes for people is if they leave a company like Microsoft and they go to a startup, that startup is almost more than likely not to be using any Microsoft stack at all. They likely are not using Windows, they're not using Office 365, and they're definitely not using Microsoft Teams. So like, and I think and that can be a real handicap for people that leave big companies. And it's not that you can't have experience in that, but you have to be more deliberate about the experience you seek and the things you want to learn, because it's not going to come naturally from your day-to-day job. So you have to over-index to be curious and to be motivated to expand outside of the company's native technologies.
That actually leads into another question that we have here from the chat room, and it's about imposter syndrome. So after you've been entrenched in such Microsoft technology and you've got the best and greatest at enterprise size everything, um, what's your advice for developers with imposter syndrome who downplay their skills? You're like you're saying, Trevin, you're moving into an ecosystem that isn't necessarily using all of those tools. Uh, Herman, Trevin, do you have advice for folks who feel that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I would say is if you are looking to leave Microsoft, right, start just dabbling in other languages that are used with startups. Like Python is huge, right, with a lot of startups today, especially around AI and ML and things like that. So definitely like start getting familiar with the technology there. I don't want to undersell the value of scale and of architecture and design that Microsoft gives you, right? Because there is a different scale factor to many of the things that Microsoft builds just innately because of the customer base. So there is value around that. But what I would say is focus more on shoring up the areas where you need to just be more well versed in, right? And those could be things around Postgres, for example, as opposed to SQL Server. It could be things around Python instead of .NET. So that's what I would essentially do.
Yeah, what I'd say, I think related to, I think the more general topic of imposter syndrome, I think there's a really close relationship of imposter syndrome and humility. And I don't think necessarily being humble is a bad thing. But what I would say is maybe turn the view of you have imposter syndrome to how do I just be more confident in myself? And I think that's an easier kind of way to think about it. And so I think that like there's nothing wrong with being humble, and but there's something wrong with not being confident in your own ability. And I think that just being comfortable with the skills you have and being okay with saying you don't have the skills. And what I have seen in a lot of candidates, a lot of friends and things like that is their imposter syndrome is actually something slightly different. It's they are self-conscious or scared about the things they don't know, which I think is connected to what Herman had said. The more well-rounded you are, the deeper you go, the broader you go in areas, you actually cover up the gaps you have. And I think you will then naturally see that, oh, that thing you called imposter syndrome was actually fear of not knowing the things that you think you should know. And I think that will naturally start to balance itself out over time. And I also think that once you make that first move, if you're thinking about a move, that just gives you more confidence. Like, oh, I can do this. I can have a career outside of Microsoft. And I think that first jump or second jump is usually the most difficult, especially if you've been at a large company like Microsoft for a long time.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd add in there as well, like definitely agreed to there, like just something a little more tactical as well for like just engineering leaders that are looking to leave. The one thing that you have to keep in mind, like this kind of talks to the points that we had earlier, which is everybody just has an outsized influence to the company at a startup, right? When a company is 50 people or 200 or 500 even, those 500 people matter a lot more. Like the amount of work you do per capita is just quite different. And so a lot of the things, like, I don't know if it's still like this at Microsoft, but during my time as I was becoming a dev manager and all that, I was becoming a lot more detached to the actual building or the actual technical nuts and bolts, right? And so what I would say is like a part of perhaps where the imposter syndrome comes from as well is just like my advice would be, if you are looking to leave Microsoft, to also get down into the details a little bit more, right? As opposed to hovering at a more surface level, like at a higher level, I would actually get down and try to just understand a little bit more and do a little bit more there, because that's just going to be expected when you go. And so, yeah, just all things to keep in mind there.
And you're leading into this next question so well. I don't even have to come up with a segue for this one. You're leading right into it. When the three of you were at Microsoft, what pushed you to take that leap of faith to start or join a startup? And the two of you, Trevin and Herman, have children. What kind of advice did you get from friends and family?
Yeah. So, did you want to go, Trevin,
Oh,
or?
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So Trevin and I actually, and two others, we did this startup on the side called Choosy. Okay. Um, and this was what, 2009, 2010, around there, right? That we did this together, and it was a great experience. Basically, what ended up happening at the end was we were doing this on the side. We were employed at Microsoft. It's either we all go in and do this for real, or it was just stagnating. But it was during that time that I realized that we were getting so much done on Wednesday nights in my living room. Like the four of us would go in there, we'd joke a whole bunch, we'd eat dinner, we'd do stuff, and then we'd work on stuff on the weekdays. It wasn't perfect, like obviously because we had a day job at Microsoft, we often got sidetracked or whatnot. But the amount of stuff that we actually did, from idea all through to build, it just gave me this aha moment, when I went back to work at Microsoft, where I remember sitting in a meeting and I was asking this other team to go deliver something, and that team had a dependency on another team, and suddenly that other team pointed back to me, and we're sitting here for an hour and we were debating things, and I realized I really wasn't moving the needle on anything. It felt like I was pushing paper more than anything else, and it was almost like the curtain unveiled at that point when I saw it. And that's when I realized that I think I need to do something. Like the choosing was a lot of fun. It was great, but for the family situation that I was in, it was just really hard to go make that work. And my wife was pretty upfront about that. And so it just led me to realize that I just needed something that was quite different than the experience that I was getting at Microsoft. It wasn't satisfying what I really needed to do, which is at the end of the day, like really be a contributor to go build. And so that was the impetus to kind of push me over. And of course for me it was making sure that I had the right family support, that my partner and my wife was in there together to make this happen. And so that was kind of the catapult in. So Trevin, let me hand it to you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I mean, I think, the question was about, hey, what pushed take a leap of faith? I think, and kind of good and bad advice, I had gotten. I think a really great advice from a friend, a really close friend of mine, named Marcus, gave me a long time ago was, while you learn and you earn in different ratios at the same time in every situation, you should prioritize one of them. So the kind of thing to think about is, do I want to earn or do I want to learn? And I think, especially at a big company, you're usually faced with, if you're even thinking about leaving, it means there's something in you that is wanting to change, something about your experience at Microsoft. Typically, it's not about pay. You're not saying like, oh, my pay isn't enough at Microsoft. It's usually more deeply rooted in something else. So I think one is to start thinking about, like, ask yourself why you want to leave, and make sure you're really clear with yourself on why you want to take that next step. Because I think if you're not clear with yourself on what the reason is, all the other stuff starts to pollute your decision matrix. You start to think about, oh, will that company be successful? Do I get paid enough and whatever? And all those things are secondary to, if your main goal, say, is to leave because you want to learn what it's like to be at a startup. You want to start your own company one day, so you want to join a startup, say, if that's the reason. So in those cases, earning is actually secondary. I think in terms of bad advice I got, the most commonly bad advice that I got was about, oh, you should just leave Microsoft. Like, it's just a carte blanche thing. Like, people will say, whether you're at Microsoft or the big company, you should just leave. Why are you still there? And I think that is just terrible advice, because they're applying their own situation and point of view and projecting onto you. And so you are the only person that cares about you as much as that, and so you need to make your own decision. So I think there's a big thing related to, like, you need to make your own decision for yourself, and kind of that was some of the worst advice I got. In terms of best advice, it was that, learn versus earn. And the other thing to think about is, instead of thinking about when you join a startup as a loss of compensation, like, I could be making XYZ if I went to Google, say, instead, or something like that. Think of the yearly compensation I'm losing. Assume that's an investment in your own education or career development. How much would that be worth to you? So let's make up a number. You're going to take $150,000 less a year, say, if you made a jump somewhere. Instead of thinking that, oh my gosh, that's $150,000 I could have, like, think about what money is. Think about it as $150,000 investment in your own development. And is that worth it? And I would challenge you and say, like, I think that if most people thought of it that way, you actually would come out of that kind of decision and got a thought process, I think, a lot different.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it, making that trade as clearly as you're describing there. That's absolutely great advice. Ali in the chat room agrees. Great advice, Trevin. Thank you. Before I get into the next question here from the chat room, I want to thank Steve Smith, or Dallas, for the raid, bringing over 22 viewers to join us here. My name is Jeff Fritz. That's D.D. Walsh. This is Trevin Chow and Herman Mann over there. We're talking today about growing your career, and Trevin and Herman are both chief product officers at startup companies. You'll see their names appear with links and information to the companies they're both at. And we're getting into, I want to be clear here. The last couple questions have been about leaving Microsoft. Fritz is not leaving Microsoft. Let's make that clear. This isn't, let's help Jeff figure out how to leave Microsoft Stream. All right, let's get that clear right out the get-go here, all right?
Right. We use Fritz because he's the best streamer, not because he is, and when I say, we actually begged Fritz to do this, so he's a great Microsoft guy.
Okay.
Anyway, so Right? Yeah. No, I think we try to make that clear in every social post. Yeah. And it's not Fritz who's alumni.
Yeah.
I'm alumni.
So there was a question coming in here. Speaking of coming out of pandemic and how we get back together and working, Walter asks, do you see Teams and other online experiences replacing face-to-face tech meetings, or do you see code camps and other live meetings coming back as a way to find growth opportunities? And when I think about that question, the in-person opportunities coming back, I don't know about the three of you. I just want to be able to get back to a live event and hug friends and shake hands with folks and say, good luck to you. Have a great experience. And there's something
Well,
about that personal
yeah, you know why
contact.
it's so loud here today is that we brought a bunch of my company back together for the first time in a year and a half. And everybody's like, we can't even believe it. We're so excited to see each other. Two people most of us hadn't met before. We hired them during the pandemic. So I don't know, face to face is great. I don't know what the future holds for how companies operate, but I do know that periodic face to face is hard to beat.
Yeah, I think companies
Yeah.
are a lot of companies are overreacting, I think. Like you hear every day in the news, like so and so companies getting rid of their headquarters and like they're going fully remote. I think there's a little bit of overreaction there, and there's a lot of other forces at play, like likely financial and economic of the money they could save, but it's, I think, talked about in a different way. Uh, I think, but I do, at that said, I think working remote is here to stay. The question is, how much percentage of your company will do that, and whether it's right for every company. For some companies, it's not the right thing. And I think this is an uncontroversial statement that working together face to face feels very different than working remote. And I don't want to say better or worse, it's just different. And I think depending on who you are, that can be a big pro on either side. Because I know there's a lot of people, there's someone had mentioned in the chat about being a developer and having anxiety disorder. Like I think there's a lot of people that may benefit from saying working remote. So I don't know I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to be like, but I think there's going to be a percentage of the workforce definitely that's going to be remote. But I feel there's a lot of reaction one way, and then we're going to kind of come a little closer to center, probably, is my view.
Yeah, I think my take on this is like the pendulum always swings one way or the other, right? Like so I don't know if people heard the Andreessen Horowitz like podcast. There was a really good talk when I think it was Mark Andreessen that was talking about this. He's like, yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? Like, what does this work look like before? So he's like, before COVID hit, he would have said engineering teams that weren't together could never develop anything. Like that was just his hypothesis. And then after it hit, everybody's working from home, and he realizes companies are delivering stuff, right, at a pace that is equivalent to what it was pre-pandemic. And he said, we're in a really interesting social experiment, which is absolutely right. Like he goes, we were in one of the two extremes. We were in a place where you had to be together, or you're in a place where you could no longer physically be together. You weren't legally and lawfully allowed to do that. But at the same time, also everything around you was closed. You couldn't take your kids to a soccer practice. You couldn't go to a theater. You couldn't go to a restaurant. You couldn't eat. So he's like, what's this going to be like in a hybrid model when it opens up again? And what will productivity be like? And so that's a question. And like Trevin says, I don't think we know. Like, I think there's some companies that have taken the extreme that say, yeah, we're getting rid of our HQ and everybody's going to be remote. I think in reality, it is going to be somewhere in the middle. There's going to be a hybrid. Remote work will stay. Like, I don't think any company will say you have to be back 5 days a week in the office. I do think, like, in addition to the company and the culture, I think roles are different too, right? Like, salespeople can live practically anywhere, and they often do, right? Because if they're covering different areas of the country, they need to be where they're going to be. And so you have different roles and the requirements there. I've heard like support teams need to be in the office more often because like better internet, don't need to VPN, things like that. But for engineering and product roles, I think it's meant to. We'll see. I think it's a combination between like somewhere between 2 and 3 days in the office and 2 and 3 days at home. So
Yeah,
we'll see how this all plays
I think
out.
what's interesting too this last year is that this last year, everyone needs to remember, was not representative of what it's like to say out of a pandemic what is it like to have a hybrid workforce remote? Because literally we were all remote. Like it was forced upon everybody. So everyone was in front of this Zoom. Imagine now, kind of contrast that to a 20-person team meeting and one person is remote. Like, how does that person feel? It's really different than when all 20 people are on Zoom. And so I think that's where I feel like I don't know, like, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but I think, like we said, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule here. I think companies have to figure it out for themselves. I see in the chat right now, there's a combination. There's some questions here about Herman, your haircut, it looks like, but also there's a rule. Someone said here, like all
Hey,
tech.
I'm about to get my haircut actually right after the call. So I'll have a pretty mean fade by the end of it, but I do have to say Trevin's fade looks pretty good
So
at this
I see
point.
that comment too, but the comment above it was about all tech companies should become 80% remote. I think like that as a rule is the same thing as is almost as I think like too far than to say 80% of the company should be in person. Like I think that like there's this pro and con there. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think the next 3 years in particular are going to be super interesting to see.
And I think it depends on where you are too. We have our primary offices in San Jose, Costa Rica, which has terrible traffic, really just terrible traffic. And so we do have to have a very good remote policy or people will quit.
As the guy who's been the one remote person with 20 people in the room, it's hard to do. It is not easy. And folks that are working remotely now, remote is the wrong word, working from home now, that think that, oh, I could just keep doing this, no big deal. You're going to hit these culture issues that happen where you need to be able to coordinate and connect with folks. And having just screen time all the time, you need a break from that at least once every month or two. You need to break that up. There is absolutely something that we as humans need to make that personal connection. So I agree with the statements of it's not 100% all the time for everybody. It really isn't. I mean, I've been working remotely for companies now for almost 10 years and Microsoft for 8 of those. And it is not trivial for you to say, yes, I'm just going to do that. I was making it a thing that once a quarter I was flying out to Redmond so that I could meet with my engineers, meet with the other program managers in person and have that human connection. You're absolutely right. Being locked in and there's nowhere to go is an incredibly different thing from I can just go wherever I want,
And
when I want.
I think it's also a misconception too that big companies do remote better than small companies, because you kind of think like, oh, I'm not in the same place as the 10 people. That's really weird. And I'll give you my own personal anecdote. Like when I was at a startup that got acquired by Nike, so I was with Nike for about 18 months, and my remote experience was pretty horrible. They're based out of Beaverton, Oregon. I can't tell you how many times I was on a laptop at the end of a conference room table when everybody was in that room talking, and then at some point I can't hear them, they can't hear me, so they're passing the laptop around, or worse, an iPhone. So can you imagine the point of view of like people holding it like this, and you're seeing like the nostrils of people, like, and then I compare that to Sketchy, the startup that I'm at now. That like they're based out of LA. I'm out of Seattle, and it's been a great experience. Like it's smaller. They understand how to do it like better. And so I think that it's not necessarily due to a company size. It literally has to be taught and ingrained. What is it like to embrace a remote worker? Which goes back to the original point of you have to be deliberate and you have to like make something work for the situation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is like the hybrid scenario is a really challenging one, right? Because like not hybrid as in part in office, part not. Like hybrid team, you got some people that are away from the office, and you got the majority there. Like you cannibalize conversations when you're close together, right? Trevin, I'm sure you felt that when you're working with your colleagues in Oregon, as you're sitting there, like they're having conversations among themselves, and it's hard just to get into that conversation. That's number one. Number two is like the information that comes out of those meetings are quite different. Like, don't forget, when you're in person, you're reading body language and all that. It's quite different than when you're seeing it on a 2D screen, which is much better than voice, right? Which is what it used to be. So that was even worse. So at least we're a little better there. But a lot of the conversations also happen after the meeting ends, right? And so after they hang up, it's not uncommon. Just like think for yourselves. We're like, hey, you got another 5 minutes? Let's just go wrap this up. And so you're in somebody's office or in shared space, and you work through the problems. And that remote worker no longer has context to anything. So they left that meeting thinking everything's great, like we decided on this, or things are still open. And then later, like in a good scenario, a summary email comes out and says, we decided this. In the most likely scenario, they end up learning about this later and they're like, WTF, I thought we were still discussing this, right? So you got to be really deliberate about that, like Trevin said. And it's a super hard problem to go tackle. The other thing I'll say as well is like people that swing the other way and say like all you have to do is Zoom is good enough. The reality there is it's not, right. Like just think about the conversations that you have. Like you have 30 minutes, you're going to go talk about work, and that's it. There's something about like Fritz, why you fly to Redmond. There's also a personal connection that you're trying to happen with people, that you understand them better, you understand how they work, their work environment, and all that stuff. So I don't subscribe to the thing that complete remote is the same as having some sort of in-person touch points.
Totally agree. There's a time and place that we need those touch points. We've got a couple of really good comments here in the chat room. I want to bring up their comments and share them here with the panel. Dom starts us off here, says, I feel like there's a balance between remote working. While I personally like it a lot, there is value to meeting face-to-face often.
For sure.
Absolutely. And Chopstick Wizard chimes in here and says, I don't think I can keep working remote. I felt like working from office made me very disciplined and productive. Can't say the same thing as working from home. That's definitely a challenge that I hear from folks, particularly if you've got small children. They're going to need your attention. And what I ended up doing a lot was I would time shift. Right, I'm going to do 2-3 hours here in the morning before the kids get up. Help them with whatever in the morning, breakfast and morning school lessons or whatever it might be. And while they're off at school or whatever, I'm going to do another 4 or 5 hours. They come home, get them set up with whatever assignment they're working on. And while they're doing that, and before dinner or just after dinner, I finish off my day. And it ends up being this time shift to accommodate. And it's not easy all the time. It really isn't. So
I think it's interesting that comment about office gets more disciplined, because I think there's a lot of people that would say the opposite. Like I can get work done more at home, and I think it's just illustrative of like that. I think the choices or the environment are really personal. But I think I would say like, hey, I think if you're going to do it from home, the thing that I've learned personally over the last year is setting boundaries. Like, yeah, I do have 2 young kids at home, and setting the boundary, and you just have to set your own discipline. Like what I would do actually for a little while, I don't do it now and I need to reinstitute it, was I would start my workday by actually leaving the house. Like I would go for a walk around the block to try to get some separation. And then at the end of the day, I would go out and walk around. So then it's not like just symbolic, I'm coming home, but it gave me a chance to like mentally have that break. And then even my wife started to talk about it. Like, when are you coming home from work? Like just kind of when she would send me messages during the day, and not assume that I could be interrupted or whatever. So I think that is like something that I had to do personally to try and get some of the discipline to do that separation.
Yeah, I have a separate room here in the house, my home office, my studio that I've set up for producing content like this. And my family knows when the door's closed, Dad's working, Dad's doing his thing, and we need to, even when they're just down the hall in their bedroom, or wherever it is they are in the house, they'll text message me, how's it going, whatever, and I'll take my time responding to them appropriately if I'm on stream or in a meeting or something. So there's definitely something to creating that separation, that office experience. There's a comment here from Old Moles that I want to bring up here. It's funny that our stand-ups prior to lockdown, post-lockdown, where all of us are back at the office in Denmark, we still speak together over Teams from our desks. Like, why do we do this? We have a conference room. Why are we on Teams? We could just go to the room and actually be together for this.
That's super interesting. Like stand up, that it's like I think you go into like, what is the purpose of stand up? If the stand up is just about like giving status and like giving and reading a status, yeah, that could be done in Teams, Slack, email, or whatever. But I think that teams should probably elevate and think like it's actually more value than that. It's actually about actually establishing rapport and connection with your colleagues. And I think that's why you would probably get up off your desk. I'm dying because this live chat has so many comments about Herman's haircut.
Oh yeah, there've been a few. I've
Indeed. Give me an hour, all right? An hour, go to the barber, it's getting cut off. We're good. I promise you, I'll take a selfie. It'll be great.
all right.
Good times.
Yeah.
Good times indeed.
Ali points out to exactly a little bit of what we're discussing. A faux commute helps in creating that separation between work and home. I definitely feel that. And 3D Polywraith, well, they just hope to retire before we continue at this rate. I see where we're going there. Eagle mentions that his company just asked everyone what they prefer going forward. This feels like a good move. And then they'll scale the office space accordingly to how much home time folks want to have. That feels like a good strategy.
It could be. I think, again, like I don't think it's hard and fast rule. I think one of the things I would say to that for anyone kind of designing or being involved to give input or reflecting on how they should think about that, I think one of the variables to consider is the kind of stability in schedule for how to think about engaging with your colleagues. Imagine it was like one of those things where you weren't sure whether someone was working today. And I know that working remote or is not the same, but imagine just decide what day of the week you will take off, any day of the week. It would feel really disruptive. And I think that teams that I've been part of, when it's more deliberate and you say like, here is essentially the rules of engagement. It might be, some teams have, deep work Wednesday where they don't do, remote meetings, or they might say, hey, everyone's working from home on Friday. I've tended to find, especially in small teams, that to be an easier way to roll out a remote policy to both balance like flexibility and giving, making sure the balance with productivity within your team members.
Yeah, rolling out and providing flexibility is a great way to start. VVG Online started freelancing in 2013, has been doing work from home since then, loves it more than the office. There we go. Freelancing, yeah, if you need that time to focus in private, makes perfect sense. Can't imagine myself in the office again. Here's what I mentioned. I go to Redmond. I was going to Redmond every few months. I would get to the end of a week of being there at the office and be like, this is why I work from home. I'm done. Like, don't need that all the time. So, we're coming up to the end of our time together, and Dee knows I do this, and I gave the guys a preview here. There's 3 questions that I wanted to make sure that I ask that I want to have as kind of a baseline that we ask our guests, our alumni guests, when they join us. Things about what it was like to be at Microsoft back in the day, whenever that day might have been. And there's 3 simple questions to kind of wrap things up and show what it was like when you worked there. The first question is, what building did you work in? Where did you call work, and what was your favorite building to work in then? Because a number of us have worked in several buildings. What was the building you called home? Trevin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be totally honest. When we talked about this ahead of the stream, I had trouble remembering even the numbers of the buildings I was in.
Oh, come on.
15 years. But I do remember where I started. I started in Red West D, and the time that I started, I was at Microsoft, started 2001. It was Red West D was it was newer. And so I then always, when I worked there, compared it to, oh, at least I'm not in building 9 or, the original. And then guess what happened? We were in
You
building
moved to
9
9.
later. So I think that was like probably the best building I thought was Red West D. The cafeteria was good. The environment, that little stream was great that was there. And the worst building was in those OG buildings. Building 9 was pretty rough.
And they're no longer there.
Yeah, I was in like I started in 27. I went to 9. I went to 40. Like that's ones I remember. I think I was in the there's some ones by like 156 and I-90 around there. Like I forgot what buildings those were that were slightly off campus. So I was there for a bit as well.
Was that advanced?
Yeah, that's it. That's what it was called.
Oh, okay.
Advanta. Yeah, it was. I lived in Issaquah at the time, and it was like easier for me to get to work and all that. So that was okay. I'd probably have to say like 27 was my favorite, just because it was the first. Like I just came out of college at the time. Nobody really had offices except for managers, and Microsoft gave offices to everybody. Albeit like I was in basically a cave because I never had windows or anything like that. But it was the best ever, right? You had your own office. And so, yeah, I just remember that.
So I went from 44 to 18 and 25 for a little bit. And I feel like it doesn't matter which building you're in. They made these things all like mazes. You really need to be like a hamster finding the cheese here, especially 25. Dear Lord, finding your way through that thing. And you feel bad for the folks with the internal offices in that place because it's just... The numbers don't always increment as you're walking down the hall. They suddenly change, and it's now 25 numbers higher in the office. The first time I walked through there, it was like, what the heck? Somebody smart must have built this building, but somebody dumb numbered the offices. Let me tell you.
Yeah, it's pretty random.
Oh, my goodness.
The X's were the worst.
Yeah. So the second question that I like to ask our guests, former Microsoft folks, what was the best place to eat on campus or just off campus? It's time to go. We're going to go to lunch. Where do you want to go for lunch when you're working on campus?
I feel like you're not like an OG. You have to mention Dixie's. I don't know if it was the best, but it was memorable.
Yeah.
Maybe in a post-COVID situation, it's like a nightmare. He's walking around with that little tin thing with a toothpick that he gives you, and so there's a lot of communal.
The thing's burnt on the bottom. You remember?
Right,
like it's actually burnt.
Burnt. So I feel it's always memorable there, but that would probably what I would say, maybe memorable, not best. I don't have a lot of best memories about necessarily eating on or around campus.
Okay.
So I'll leave.
Yeah, like me, I definitely say Dixie's as well, but there's a place that we went, like when I was in directory services, there's a place that a bunch of us would go to all the time. It was just like Chinese place. We called it Chop Chop. I don't know what the name was, but we just call it Chop Chop. And we'd go in there. It's right by like Safeway on Northeast 24th. It's by there in that strip mall. So we would go there. I remember ordering like the fried beef noodles or whatever. It was always like a lunch set menu. And everybody just had a ball eating it. I can't say it was the best food, but it was like the most memorable experience that we had off campus.
Building 9 has the best donuts.
Not anymore.
They did, yeah.
That was a thing. And gosh, I feel like every time I'm in town, the folks I work with, we got to go to either Chipotle or the Qdoba that's right off campus. I'm like, can't we find some place that has a little bit more style than one of these fast food joints? I don't know.
Not in Redmond.
Wow. All right. Allie points out from Dixie's, the man. Have you met the man?
Yeah, I mean, you go there. He's the one carrying around that dirty little pot, or was. I think he passed. I think sadly.
Yeah, he passed away, and so did the daughter. So I think they shut it down. Sadly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but it was. Remember walking in there, and they were just rigid, right? Like you had to know what the hell you're ordering, and you had to make a decision right away. It's like,
oh yeah, it's like
it was pretty crazy.
It's like that soup kitchen.
It's like the soup
Nazi.
Yeah, the soup
from
Nazi.
Seinfeld.
Yeah, Seinfeld. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Allie says you wouldn't recognize main campus now. No, there's a quarter of campus that's just been plowed under and they're rebuilding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, Allie said, yeah, the man is a hot sauce. That's what I seem to remember too. It's like the guy that was carrying it would say, do you want to meet the man? Right. And then, so do you remember Trevin, Mark Wong?
Uh-huh.
So Mark Wong, like this guy we worked with, he prided himself in being able to eat really hot stuff. And I remember
oh,
they gave him like a toothpick in this thing. He's like, no, give me a whole spoonful. And the guy was like, are you sure you want that? And he gave it to Mark. And Mark ate it. And I swear to God, like, you just watch his facial expression. It went from, oh, it's not that bad, to suddenly he's starting to tear up. And then he starts sweating, like literally just sweating. It's coming down. And he's asking the guy, he's like, do you have any milk? I need some. So the next day, Mark's like, yeah, it wasn't a very pleasant morning. It was just, yeah,
ooh,
it hurt.
no.
He met the man. The man destroyed him.
The man ripped him apart. Yeah, quite the bit.
It's Hot Ones Microsoft Edition. I don't know. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the last question I like to ask our guests, Fear Factor Alley says, do you have a favorite memory, some brush with one of the more infamous, more famous executives at Microsoft that you can share that isn't that's clean, that's no swearing, please. This is a family-friendly, safe for work environment.
I'm trying to filter through my head now.
Ah,
Yeah, I mean, I've got one. I mean, I had two opportunities to meet Bill, and one was when I was an intern. You know, back in the day, the interns got to go to his house for a barbecue. That was pretty special. And then the end of my time at Microsoft, I had the opportunity to meet with him in a work setting. It was not important what it was, but it was a time where he wasn't as actively, involved day to day, but he was involved in that meeting. It was a pretty small meeting with Satya and some others, and he's got definitely fire in him. Like, still at that point, it was, I mean, super smart, a lot of fire. That's me keeping it clean. But yeah, it was memorable.
I think there's something.
Yeah, I think for me. Oh, go on.
I was going to say, I think there's something to be said about a guy who was the founder and CEO of the company being that passionate 30, 40 years on. That's impressive,
For sure.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Herman.
Yeah, for me, I think the story was, like, I just joined Microsoft straight out of college. And so I was at the Pro Club at night, and Bomber was playing basketball with a bunch of guys. And so I just remembered, like, I remember so clearly that they fed him the shot, and it was like a 3-point shot, and he completely airballed it, like completely. It wasn't even close to the rim. And the guys there are all clapping, good shot, Steve, great shot. Like, oh my gosh, it sounded like he solved world hunger. It was crazy. I'm just like, all right, yeah, that's a culture, got it, right? And so that was the memorable moment for me. But it was pretty comical. Hopefully his Clippers do a little better than that. So we'll see.
They're in the Western Conference Finals.
They're doing well now.
Yeah.
They are 1-2. I'm
There they go.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have a clean story that I can tell, because in the our other ones I was a little off color, but my first Bill Gates meeting 150 years ago, I was working with a team, and I was the only woman. This was back when there weren't very many women doing product management, and I had felt they weren't totally jerks to me, but they kind of talked down, and a few times they said things like, well, if the girl can do it, then anybody can do it. And so I knew they didn't really have a lot of confidence in me, so I didn't want to ask stupid questions, and I didn't. And so leading up to the Bill meeting, I didn't ask them some of the questions that I thought were obvious, because I thought, oh, they'll think I'm stupid. So too long, I won't go into it too much. We go to the Bill meeting, and every stupid question that I wanted to ask, Bill asked. And so I learned an important lesson that day, which is, don't be afraid to ask the stupid question, because that is, I noticed that Bill was never afraid to ask the most basic question that, you'd think, oh, I felt like I was being stupid. And anyway, so I learned something. I'm glad I learned that early in my career.
That's a really good thing to learn. Don't be afraid to, and I see that from so many folks when they first join Microsoft. I don't want to ask the stupid question. I don't want to be called out immediately as the person asking the silly question. You're not leveled up. You're not Microsoft quality because you're asking the dumb question. Yeah, old moles are. Everybody asks a dumb question at some point. It's no question is too dumb, I guess, is really what we're saying. That's a great thing to learn. Yeah, I agree. Dukasoft in chat saying it's a great thing to learn. So, my goodness, it's been about 2 hours, friends. This has been a great chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Do we have any final words to wrap up? Final advice you want to give to folks that are looking to grow their career?
I guess what I'd say is I think everyone's career path is their own. So I think that you can find a lot of happiness and fulfillment in your career path by not comparing your success to others and to just be deliberate in what you're trying to do. And that journey can be really fun. And to think about the road traveled versus the destination. And I think that like I keep having a ton of fun in my career and it's going to keep going on for a while, I hope. But I try not to think about it in terms of getting to a place. It's more about like where I am right now and am I enjoying it?
Definitely.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. Like, just I'd say be deliberate, right, and be intentional with what it is that you want to do next. Like Trevin said, actually you put it really well. Like, learn or earn. But it's more really about what are the experiences that you want to get. What are the things that you really want to focus on? Is there a social mission, or is there something that you really want to go solve, right? And don't be afraid to go solve it. The one thing I'll also say is, it kind of gets back to one of the earlier questions. What would I tell my earlier self? The reality is like if you leave Microsoft, you could always go back if you wanted to. Frankly, like once you leave Microsoft, there's a ton of other big companies that reach out to you all the time, right? So there's no risk in not leaving it. The real question is are you yourself ready for it, and is your family ready and supportive for your move as well? And so just be realistic with that.
Awesome. And I'll give you about the dumb questions topic. Surly Dev chimes in with his feedback. Ask dumb questions. They're easier to fix than dumb mistakes. That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good
Yeah.
one. Regarding leaving Microsoft, Ali points out that 10% of Microsoft's hires are boomerangs. Folks coming back that
Yeah,
were once
yeah.
employees.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's easy to think that once you leave, you can't go back. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You leave, you decide, hey, that's not for you or whatever, and you find another job to come back. And dirty little secret is that the fastest way to get promoted on Microsoft is to leave and come back. Just throwing that out there.
Are you trying to give me an idea here? I'm not saying, but I'm just asking.
I just leave that without further comment.
Yeah,
Jeff.
I see how this works. Well, thank you. So I want to thank the panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Trevin, Herman, Dee, of course, over there.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And
Yeah,
It's good to have a little reunion.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Ali points out there is a road to rehire portal on microsoftalumni.com. If you're an alumni, make sure you check that out if you're looking to find a new gig, maybe even get back into.
Hey, Jeff, can I give a shout out for the gigs that I'm hiring for?
Sure, absolutely. Go for it.
I'll just totally do the startup thing. So I'm with Sketchy. That was kicked off at the top of the hour. So we're an online ed tech platform. So we use visual learning, art, storytelling, and memory palace technique to make learning easier and faster. We're used by 1 of 2 med students in the country, and we are used by students in 100% of the med schools in the country. So we're hiring for every role, in particular product, design, engineering, and marketing. So if you would love to talk about it, I'd love to chat. So reach out to me on Twitter as Trevin, or you can email me Trevin at sketchy.com.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah, and I'll do a plug out for Blue Vine as well, just really quickly. So since Trev started,
See, good
but,
idea.
It's
yeah,
that time for
there we
plugging.
go.
Go for it.
It is. So Blue Vine, we're a fintech. We're based in the Bay Area, but we have offices on the East Coast as well as in Tel Aviv. So we help small businesses. That's our vision, and our mission is to empower small businesses with a better financial future. That's what we do. So, like, to give you an idea, during PPP, when COVID hit, we really helped with PPP loan distribution and disbursement and so forth. And so we have a lending platform, a banking platform, and so forth that we're building out. Like Trevin, we're hiring all over the place across product design and all other roles as well. So if interested, go check out bluevine.com careers and go take a look there.
Very cool. There's a question here from the Keviv in chat. Do you hire new developers in Canada?
For us, I'd have to think about I think when you're a small startup, it's just more complicated about where you can hire due to like the impacts of taxation and things like that. So actually for Canada, I'm not sure the answer for Sketchy. I can find out. I don't know what the answer is, obviously, for Herman.
Yeah, we don't have anything today in Canada. Now, obviously being Canadian, I'd love to go do that. But to Trevin's point, I think, we're very focused on the US right now and just being in there right now. And if things change in the future, that'll definitely be the next market that we'll go into.
Trevin, Bobby's asking, what is that in your background that you have there behind you?
Yeah, this is a scene from our MCAT program we just launched. So, physics, UCL, the characters are newts, Newtonian mechanics. Get that? So this is a scene out of that where we teach. This is about forces and motion. So this kind of a sample. Cartoons aren't just for kids anymore. We can teach pretty complicated topics like med school and MCAT.
Very cool. Dukasoft says it looks awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the panel. This has been a great discussion. I'm still not leaving Microsoft, but thank you so much for all the tips for folks that are looking to grow their career and get outside of this. There's a number of younger folks in their career that have been watching. Some other alumni I saw chime in. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna dismiss the panel and head over to my other scene here to wrap things up and get ready to set up a raid. So I will catch the three of you later. Take care. And I am rolling over here. How's it going there, friends? So good to see you. That was great. I always enjoy having the folks on from the Microsoft alumni, and we're gonna set up for a raid. We're gonna have them back every few months and have a nice discussion, talk over some things about growing a career, and meet some folks that help build some of the Microsoft products that you might be using. So let's get ready. Let's set up the raid. I'm going to take a look over here at who's out on Twitch that we can connect with. Set up a raid and join, and I think I know who we're going to go to right away. Our friends at Twilio are running an event called Twilio Relay. So I think we should connect with them. We should go visit and check out their event. So here comes the raid. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you to the Microsoft Alumni Association for joining us today. Thank you, Dee Walsh, to Trevin, to Herman. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's do this again in a few months. Get ready to say hi to our friends over at Twilio, and I will see you on Sunday for a stream from a hot tub. Dee did something to do that to me. We'll figure that out on Sunday. Have a good one. Get ready to say hi to our friends over at Twilio. Take care.